did all types of shows, but always really focusing on positive aspects. So we did youth shows, we did a hockey show, we did a bunch of different stories, and as things went along further, we dove more into the different matters, serious matters, because we felt we were in a better position to do it. One of those things that came along, or one of the discussions that we always had, and this was more or less combining my role as a father to a young son that is his mom is also his mom is Mohawk. And one thing that we found ourselves dealing with oftentimes is the fact that our son, who lives in Gatineau, um, is learning about his culture through schools, and we've both been asked to go to schools and to talk about the Indigenous experience in Canada, and one of the words that we got from different teachers is how how do I go about doing it, and what should I say? And then it kind of allowed me to kind of reflect back that even though I was from an Indigenous community, I did some time in school back home at the Polyvalent, and I did some time here in Ottawa going to school. And I remember going to school here away from my community, and it was basically the book that I learned had, you know, 3 pages on Indigenous Canada, and it was very basic. And to me, and I remember being young, a lot younger, where you're dealing with who am I as a person? I'm a teenager. I was fairly shy, but at that point there was a certain part of me that was a little bit scared, or didn't want to kind of say, well, because of the way I look, obviously I didn't want to come out and say, well, yeah, I'm from a First Nation, and you know, the reality that we're learning right now isn't at all what who we are as a people. And then you kind of, so you spend your one class, an hour, 2 hours maybe, on the whole subject. And then here we are, you know, years later, and now our son goes to school, and it's a bit of the same thing, where he comes home and he says, well, we learned today about, you know, the Iroquois and the Algonquins, and that's it. And again, like I mentioned before, both of us, both his mother and I, are asked to speak at schools, and you know, dealing or talking about Indigenous Canada, you know, through school activities is always a difficult task, because, and I can understand the position some of the teachers are in terms of, what do I say? Is it okay to say this? And a lot of teachers just shy away from it, unfortunately, because the resources aren't there. And for kids, I mean, at some point, if we want to kind of unite, I, I would say unite the country, or bring back cultural pride and to Indigenous people, and students that are possibly living off of reserve, or that are being schooled off reserve, there needs to be things there that kind of bring it into that context. So one thing that we wanted to do is that, I mean, residential schools is such a big part of you know, Canada's history, and it is a dark part, but it is also, explains a lot of things. And whether a child is 8 or 16, we wanted to create a tool that would allow teachers and to kind of talk about the subject, but also to allow students to visualize what it was. Because even as an adult, when you do talk about the residential school eras, and that experience, and as an Indigenous person, you get different answers. You get, well, that was a long time ago. This, I'm sorry, but that's not my fault. Sometimes you'll get those comments from, let's say, a non-Indigenous person. So it still becomes that subject that is kind of like, people don't want to talk about. And luckily now more and more we are talking about it because it needs to be talked about. So when we brought up to this, and again, so my spouse Sonia, who's the co-creator of the project, I mean, her grandfather went to Shinwalk Residential School, and when she decided years back to go explore Shinwalk, she went to visit it, and she walked through the same halls that her grandfather had walked through. It opened a lot of her eyes on what he must have experienced and what he must have lived. So Mr. Bonsfield, who went through to residential school, came back home after his experience and did everything to avoid the subject. So with that said, and that in mind, we kind of conceived William together, saying, let's get something that is more than a textbook. Let's get something that's going to break down different parts of the residential experience to be able to talk about different themes like life before residential schools. Let's do loss of culture, loss of language, the impacts. So what I can do is we're going to roll into a little clip that we created that is specifically one of the modules of the VR experience, which is the classroom. And what we really wanted to show in the classroom experience is that trying to illustrate what a classroom setting would have been for many of these kids, where they found themselves learning a language that wasn't their own, and oftentimes just learning something that wasn't that isn't their language. So although you can be told about it, if you experience it and you witness it and you're part of that experience, it kind of creates something that is completely different. So perhaps I would say let's roll that clip, and people can understand a bit more.
Absoslucio. Absoslucio. Sio. Luquas sun la T-I-O-N. Absolucio. Giple. Absolucio. Poutard. Absolucio. T-I-O-N. L'atmose a subke T-I-O-N. Ki dommelo sio. Cocomes. Dodra. Absolution. Bretet. Absolution. Encore. Absolution. Que répéter. Absolution. Yamesiemo. Qui s'était mine à Sion.
So perhaps we can pause it here. So I think for those of you that aren't don't understand or haven't experienced VR before, is that basically if you were to experience this, there's two ways to experience the classroom scene is either with a typical VR headset where you would put it on and you'd get audio and you'd get visuals according to where you turn your head, it would respond. So as a user, when you're going through this, you dictate a little bit of what you're seeing and what you're experiencing. So for one user, perhaps his focus would be exactly on the little girl that we see in front of us because she is doing a certain thing. A second user would be looking behind where what we are seeing now. And let's say a third user would simply focus on the nun at the front. So everybody who basically goes through the situation is able to dictate that experience, making it in a way so that every time you could basically view the experience three, four different times and they would all be different. The acting in the scene remains identical throughout, but the headset kind of will show you different things according to where you look. So that is how we built this scene specifically. Um, Again, I mean, for us, it was kind of like creating a certain interactiveness that would be ideal to keep both the interest of the viewer, depending on their age, and also maybe offering them a more inclusive uh, view of the project and the subject matter. So the whole thing basically came from um, about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, no, 10 years ago, there was the VR had just started and there was a bunch of different experiences and there was a few experiences that were created that were part of, they were called empathy projects, where it was a notion that said that people were a lot more receptive to understanding a serious matter or wanting to know more of a certain problematic that exists if they experienced it rather than just being told about it. Because when you're told about it without experiencing it, there's a barrier that's created there that you're kind of okay, well, yeah, it's sad, but how does that impact me? So we wanted, as I mentioned before, to transport, students and viewers. I mean, this can, we hope that the project will resonate with people different ages and whatnot. So we wanted to transport people right to the middle of this. And again, like I mentioned, we still find ourselves experiencing a classroom scene that is similar to what a residential school would have been like. To create the project itself and the scenes, we sat down with a group. We had a consultation group made up of many different survivors. So everything that is in this scene specifically is authentic and based on actual accounts from our survivor group. We can keep playing the video a little bit.
Comme mot, obligation. 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 Il pleut. Obligation. Sio. Blonner le grayot. Blonner le grayot. Aiguiffer. Obligation. O. B. L. I. G. A. T. I. O. N. O. B. L. I. G. A. T. I. O. N. On étrie. Blandon Graillon. Écrit O B L I G A T I O N. La faute James. Quelqu'un connaît un mot à mot et sa termination. Michel. Michel. Michel! Au tableau. Avalant et aigri. Como dissémination.
So we can pause it again. So this specific clip is the French version of the clip, although the language isn't 100% recognizable. There are tiny words that can be made out or that sound like something. And again, for us, this scene specifically was to bring in the notion and to get the discussion about the importance of language and the loss of language. And so, as you can see in the last minute or so of the clip, the nun calls over one of the students, and he doesn't recognize right off the bat the name that he's been given, or he doesn't really understand what's being told of him or what's being asked of him. So his classmate behind him kind of nudges him over to help him out and to send him up to the chalkboard. But again, this little clip would be kind of like a precursor to, okay, now that we've seen this and we can understand this part of it, what are the impacts of the loss of language? Okay. And then that kind of would kind of help guide the first discussions about that subject matter. So again, like I mentioned, for us, we can probably jump out of the clip for now. That way I can talk directly to everybody. So, I mean, for us, we wanted to create, as I mentioned, the project itself has, right now, we've only created that one scene because the pandemic put a stop to all of our plans and our shooting plans for the next scene. But the project itself has basically 6 different scenes, such as the classroom scene. So the first one is before residential school. So we do see William when he's back home with his family, you know, living off the land and living in his own setting. And we wanted to show that culture shock of and also establish the fact that, you know, most of these kids were taken from their family lives, which were under, you know, which the uprooting of that and the impacts of that. The second scene is basically when the Indian agent shows up to take the kids and bring the kids to residential schools. And again, it's to be able to show the fact that these kids were taken away and not, in most cases, weren't necessarily willing participants. In some cases, you know, there was some manipulation and whatnot. The third one is when kids do arrive for the first time at the residential school, and that process of stripping them of their clothes, that you know, hair cutting and whatnot. So we are aware that a lot of these scenes may have triggers, and that was one thing that we've created in here, is that there needs to be that discussion has to happen as well, and the support has to be offered with that for let's say for somebody who's viewing it. And then we go into the fourth scene is a dorm scene about to illustrate the loneliness and to create that context that these kids were here for so long, and that the solitude, the loneliness, and whatnot. And the fifth scene is the classroom, and then the sixth scene is after going back to the community. In the case of the co-creator's grandfather, when he went back home after residential school, his parents were no longer in the community. They had moved on because they had been told that he had passed away. So he found himself going to a community where nobody knew where his parents had moved on to, and nobody knew who he was. So unfortunately, he ended up going to Montreal and building a life there. And only later on, once he decided to go back home, did he get reacquainted. So again, all of these 6 different scenes or scenarios all allow a discussion that is specific to the impacts of residential schools. And some of them are going to be tailored or are more tailored to a certain age group, as opposed to others, which would be tailored to an older age group. But again, what you guys just witnessed is that is the YouTube tablet version or phone version, which requires no equipment other than a phone or a tablet. But there's also the true VR version, which can be seen like through Google Cardboard or a true VR headset. So, I mean, everything is kind of adaptable to that. Um, yeah, and what else do I have here? Um, so the plan for the rest of the, we could actually finish the scene. Can we roll the video, the rest of the video?
Te calme. Les filles! Silence! Domination. Domination. Domination.
And that's it.
We do have some questions.
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the questions from a grade 8 student was, how long does it take to make a scene?
Basically, what you're seeing now is captured in one sequence. So basically, the camera is a 360-degree camera. So making the scene itself takes the same time as you would see, but the preparation for it took about 6 weeks.
Okay.
From the rehearsals to getting everything verified and authentified and all the different moving parts that go into creating the scene, it took 6 weeks.
Another question, what was the reaction of the young actors that you cast to do this? What did
Yeah, well,
did they talk
I
about
mean,
that?
yeah, for sure. A lot of the actors were actors from my community or around the Ottawa area. And obviously, we've done a few projects about on residential schools. So there does on our end, we do verify with the parents and make sure that there has been that discussion and that the actors are aware of everything and what that implies in terms of possible triggers. And a lot of the actors here are directly impacted by residential schools. So obviously it's a delicate subject matter. And one thing that we did in our creative process and talking to our survivor consultation group is that for them it was very important to get the story out there because for so many years and still even last year and the year before that a lot of Canada didn't believe what was being said. So again, it's a step in that direction that, one of the great quotes that I've been seeing, for a while is before we get to reconciliation, we need to hear the truth. And that's basically we're hoping to achieve here.
For sure. Were you with the survivors that you
Yeah.
worked with when you screened this? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, was that
Yeah.
powerful? Yeah.
It's very powerful and but it's also I mean there's so many emotions and obviously there's some support that goes into it but it's liberating but it's also eerie, it's also reliving old emotions or emotions that perhaps they had put away, so it's a very delicate process for everybody. And one of the survivors, his point of view was when we talked about, well, we want kids in schools to learn about this and stuff like that. And he mentioned, I want my own grandchild to see this. And I want my own kids to see this because this is something I I, I still can't talk about, you know? So yeah. So and
Yeah, if a teacher listening or watching today wants to keep in touch with you or learn when things will be available and so on, where should they go?
yeah, we have a website, so William 360 VR, which is about the project. I mean, we're still in the beta phase and we're still kind of, everybody is super interested in the project. And it went from being, oh, excuse me, it went from being something very small to just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as things have evolved and changed, I mean, we've had, can we do a whole, a whole college course on this, can we do this, can we, so it's just gradually changing. But to stay in touch or to maybe mention anything, to just go to the website. There is basically an email there where people can send in notes or messages or and I think so. Like I mentioned, the plan is to film the rest of it in January to have a rollout next September.
Well, you just read the mind of the question that was just being asked. They were just wondering what the timeline was on that. So
Yeah.
that's great. I guess to wrap up this part of it, what has it impacted you and your partner? I mean, this must have
Yeah,
been,
I mean, it's how can you say it? And it's um, I mean, there are things there that and I want to make sure that this is clear, is that we're not, you know, um, we're very thankful to the survivors for sharing their stories, and a lot of people, I mean, that are maybe non-indigenous don't understand all of the impacts, but I can give you one impact that we're dealing with on our own level today, where our son, who goes to school today, and he's in grade 5 here in Gatineau, and although it is orange shirt day, he was worried about being the only one with an orange shirt, you know, and that is something that is extremely, so for him. Yeah, he does have ties, that he is who he is, and he goes back to his mom's community. He'll go back to my community once in a while, and that's who he is, but he's still not 100% um, comfortable with who he is when he's away from there, because he's scared of what that means. So even today, with everything that's happening on, there still are impacts about what it means about, and the initial plight of residential schools of killing the Indian and the child still exists so many years after, you know, and those impacts are felt even today. And so, yeah.
that's really important for everyone listening to hear. And I hope everyone out there continues to wear an orange shirt and learn as we're learning this week. I want to thank you so much. This has been wonderful, powerful, and we will watch your journey as you complete this project. But thank you. I've just been overwhelmed. I ask everyone to, as I said, light up your homes tonight in orange or hang orange in your windows. We have a national broadcast on CBC, and it's going to be streamed live on APTN and CBC GEM. It's called the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And we hope everybody tunes in and continues to watch these sessions tomorrow, October 1st. And again, thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you.